Okay, this is chapter 6 of Zodiac. Zodiac. Tuesday, October 14th, 1969. At 10:30 a.m. at the Chronicle, letters editor Carol Fisher had just returned from a long vacation out of the country. She shared a small office on the third floor with the two editorial writers. While the writers, the publisher and I, were in the editorial conference, she would go through the pile of mail that readers showered upon the paper every day. One letter was addressed in blue felt tip. SF Chronicle, San Fran, Calif. Please rush to editor. Please rush to editor. The postmark showed the letter had been mailed the previous day and from San Francisco. The return address had been replaced by a symbol, a crossed circle. Carefully, Carol slit open the envelope and withdrew a folded letter. As she opened it, a 3 by 5 inch piece of gray and white cloth, neatly torn, not cut, and spattered with blood, fluttered out onto her desk. Zodiac had written his 5th letter. Quickly she scanned the thin blue lines. This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt. I am the same man who did in the people in the North Bay area. The SF police could have caught me last night if they had searched the park properly instead of holding road races with their motorcycles, seeing who could make the most noise. The cab drivers should have just parked their cars and sat there quietly waiting for me to come out of cover. The letter closed with an incredibly chilling threat. Though the first portion of this letter has been reported before, this is the first time the entire letter has been shown. School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning. Just shoot out the front tire and then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. Carol, holding the letter by 2 fingers, alerted us and raced to the city desk. I just got this thing in the mail. The city desk immediately telephoned the SFPD homicide detail. The letter was the first Xeroxed and photographed. We all crowded around to read it, while reporter Peter Stack, who was working as a relief for Bob Pop, the regular man at the Hall of Justice, brought the letter and bloody cloth over to Toshi and Armstrong at their office. I don't know if this has any merits, said Stack. We got this letter and my boss said to bring it over to you guys and see if it means anything. Toshi looked up from his desk. It's kind of dirty, said Stack. There's a kind of bloody piece of cloth or shirt. He dropped it on the blotter in front of Toshi and Armstrong. Toshi saw the fabric and remembered it from Saturday night. Jesus Christ, he said. This looks like Stein's shirt. Bill, I think this is Stein's shirt. Armstrong turned to Stack. We're going to bring this shirt down to the coroner's office. Stein's clothing is being held there. The detectives had to know how many people had touched the letter and asked Stack to see if he would find out. Before Toshi and Armstrong went down to the coroner's office, they stopped at Chief of Inspectors Marty Lee's office and asked to see him as soon as possible. We've got something going here, said Toshi. When they were finally ushered into Lee's office, Armstrong pulled the letter out of its glass sign envelope and laid it very carefully on the Chief of Inspector's desk. I think we're involved in a heavy case, said Toshi. I think we're involved in a mass murderer. I think San Francisco is involved. Stack from the Chronicle hand carried it over. Has this been printed yet? Said Lee, glancing at it without touching it. No, said Armstrong. I'd better tell the chief about this, said Lee, reaching for the phone. Armstrong and Toshi dropped the letter at the phone lab to have some 8 by 10s made. The crime lab would now make an attempt to bring out any latent prints on the letter. Paper is always the worst surface to work from. Not only is the surface difficult, but most professional criminals wear gloves or put airplane glue, nail polish, or collodion on their fingertips. The goddess, the printman, sprayed Zodiac's letter with a highly toxic purplish chemical solution called ninhydrin. This distorts all printing and turns the paper purple. The chemical reacts on the sweat and amino acids left by the fingerprints on the paper's surface. Both sides of the Zodiac letter were sprayed and then brought next door to the print lab darkroom. The letter was placed on a shelf and left to develop. The entire process took from 3 to 4 hours. On the main floor annex, Toshi and Armstrong saw the coroner, Dr. Harry Turkle, who got all of Stein's clothing out of the property clerk's office. They went back upstairs and told Lee that the cloth enclosed with the letter had come from the left lower portion of Stein's shirt. San Francisco was definitely involved. Their next step was to compare the printing on the Zodiac letter with printing on other letters Zodiac had sent to the press. Captain Townsend of Napa agreed to meet with Tashi and Armstrong at his office with his investigator. They also called the Solano County Sheriff's Office, since all of them would probably be working together. Armstrong and Tashi felt stunned. They were involved with an insane killer, one who so far had left 5 victims dead and 2 wounded. Later in the day, Tashi called Paul Avery, the Chronicle reporter who had been following the Zodiac case so far. With the matching of the shirts, said Tashi, we're pretty definitely up to our ears in the Zodiac murders. That night, Armstrong and Tashi drove to Napa to talk to Townsend and Detective Sergeant Narlow. He agreed that the printing on the letter of the Chronicle matched the previous Zodiac printing. Wednesday, October 15th, 1969. Tashi and Armstrong drove to Sacramento to show the actual letter to the head of question documents for the state, Sherwood Morrell. Even after being chemically treated, an original letter is always better than a copy in making comparisons. Morrell found that the letter matched in every way the earlier communications from the killer. Zodiac used a bizarre mixture of cursive letters and printing. The killer always used an R that was so small it looked like a check mark, and a cursive D that seemed to fall over. If this guy keeps it up, said Morrell, he'll probably concentrate on writing to your department. If he's an ego nut, he'll stay with the larger circulation newspapers. Tashi looked down at the headlines for that morning's Chronicle. The boastful slayer letter claims writer killed cabbie 4 others. The paper reprinted the composite sketch and ran the top half of the Zodiac's letter. At police request, the threat at the end of the letter was withheld while authorities tried to figure out the best way to handle it. Friday, October 17th, 1969. Publication of Zodiac's threat was finally allowed. The public reacted with panic. There was a flurry of television, radio, wire service, and newspaper reports. An emergency bulletin was issued to police, county, and city school superintendents. To all law enforcement agencies, a San Francisco cabbie was murdered by an unknown psychotic who has threatened to wipe out a school bus, then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out. Advice to school bus drivers on how to handle any sort of violent attack on buses followed. 1. Continue driving the bus on a flat tire. Do not stop. 2. Tell the children to get below the level of the window and lie on the floor. 3. The driver will continue driving and turn on all lights and sound the horn. 4. The school bus shall not be stopped until arriving in a well-populated area. 5. Upon arrival at this location, a local law enforcement agency should be notified immediately. The Napa Valley Unified School District called in all 90 of their full-time and part-time drivers. The drivers were told that the driver would be the first target in Zodiac's gun sight if there was an attack on the bus. An extra man, a watcher, was assigned to each bus to take over in case of a sniper attack. State law requires that when a school bus driver leaves the bus to escort the children across the street, he must pocket the ignition key. Because of the threat, the driver would leave the key with the backup driver, who would stay with the busload of children. If the driver were shot, the second driver was to drive away as fast as possible and as far as possible. Remember, they were told, attract as much attention as possible by sounding the horn, flashing lights, and erratic driving. 10,000 school children in 28 schools rode Napa County's 65 yellow-striped buses. The buses traveled 4,000 miles round trip in a day, much of it around dangerous curves and through blind intersections. In some places, the country roads were completely deserted, with as much as 2 miles separating houses. Tashi could imagine a busload of screaming children careening down an empty gravel road, past orchards and vineyards, horns shrieking, lights furiously flashing, the driver badly wounded behind the wheel, or perhaps a bus rendered motionless, with Zodiac methodically shooting out each of the tires of its 8 wheels and then firing at the 40 students inside. In the reaction to the bulletin, 70 units of heavily armed policemen began to ride along on the Napa school buses. Napa Sheriff's Department and St. Helena PD and the Highway Patrol were assigned to guard the children on the buses. Pickup trucks from the Forestry Department and ranger stations at Lake Beressa were put into service as well. They were told to follow the buses and to stay 100 yards behind. Cessna aircraft from the Napa Aero Club and the Sheriff's Department in air patrol planes flew over the hundreds of miles of school bus routes. Napa school officials said, "How can you overreact to a threat like that? We are worrying as to whether we've done enough. If a madman could get to President Kennedy with all the protection he had, then it could happen in Napa, even with all we've done." Because of a bomb threat received in Santa Rosa by a caller who hinted that he might be the Zodiac, a careful check for bombs was made in the morning before the route was begun. The panic in Napa was no greater than that felt at the Hall of Justice in San Francisco. At 9 a.m. October 16th, Fuchs and Zelms, the two radio men who had seen the stalking man walking into the Presidio, realized that they must have passed the killer. They filed an initial report with their captain. This was sent as an interdepartmental communication to Armstrong and Tashi. The two patrolmen were shattered and filled with despair. With the help of the two patrolmen, a second composite drawing of Zodiac was made. The amended drawing now showed a man 35 to 45 years old with a thicker jaw. He weighed 200 pounds or more, was barrel-chested, and wore a navy blue or black waist-length zippered jacket. He was noted as being about 5 feet 8 or 9 with reddish-brown crew-cut hair and wearing heavy-rimmed glasses. The patrolman's report and statement were placed in confidential files. SFPD officially denied that the Zodiac had ever been seen by any policeman. The denial stands to this day. Several sources have told me Zodiac had undoubtedly been almost captured by the SF police. The police have never been able to explain why a second composite drawing suddenly had to be made. In the offices of the Palo Alto Times, a man had found the news desk and claimed, "This is the Zodiac. I had to leave San Francisco because I'm too hot there." The Palo Alto police chief called the anonymous telephone message extremely serious. It may have been only a crank call, but he preferred to take no chances and got in touch with the district transportation supervisor. Between them, they arranged to have an armed guard ride with each of the system's 25 buses. In almost all Northern California communities, some of the police protection was provided. In San Francisco, plainclothes men in 24 unmarked cars watched the buses. More than 100 police vehicles were alerted. "The interval between attacks has gotten frighteningly short," Armstrong said to the press. "It could come any day. God, I'd hate to speculate."